Oh, God.
We have to start with the
Yeah.
foundation.
Oh,
If you're gonna do how do you feel comfortable?
okay.
Oh wow, that is a crooked stool.
Yep.
You can just put it on one of the sides.
You do.
In the middle. See what it looks like.
Which one?
Just open Zoom.
Zoom. Okay.
Maybe. Is there? You can take the stool off the middle. Focus it on Zienab. Then look. Is it? Turn it that way.
It looks okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Under that.
Curtis, maybe can you angle it a little bit?
Oh, I was trying to cut him out.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Bismillah, yeah, that's good. Thank you. Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. How's the volume? Is it okay? How's it now? Is it still okay? Is it still okay? All right. We're going to start with the devotion of Imam Nawawi. As I mentioned last time, and I swear this is not because it benefits us. I really think you should own this book. And there should be a box being sold at the table. But it's really good. I don't know what else to say. We sold out? Oh man, I have another box. If I was knowing, I was already bringing it. Okay, I'll bring it next week, inshallah. So you can buy more next week. And if you don't have it or you don't want to buy it or whatever your reasoning is, you can go to the Majlis website and on the blog publications area, you'll find a link that you can follow along. However, the link is not exactly the same because there's two different riwayas of Imam Nawawi's devotion. It's two different narrations. One of them slightly different than the other one. There's the Arab, like the Mashriqi version and the Maghribi version. This is the Maghribi version. It's a little bit shorter. So if you're like a little bit different, it's close enough. So as a reminder, you can, one of the things that we can do when we start this is to, of course, think about any needs that we have and make the intention that they're fulfilled. We can think about anything that we would want to make dua for, we can bring that into our heart. And anyone that we would want to make dua for, we can bring them into our heart. Anyone that we know, anyone who may have asked us to make dua for them, anyone from our family members or loved ones, the entirety of the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. على نفسي وعلى ديني وعلى أهلي وعلى أولادي وعلى مالي وعلى أصحابي وعلى أديانهم وعلى أموالهم أنف بسم الله الله أكبر الله أكبر. أقول على نفسي وعلى ديني وعلى أهلي وعلى إخواني وعلى مالي وعلى أصحابي وعلى أديانهم وعلى أموالهم أنف بسم الله الله أكبر الله أكبر. أقول على نفسي وعلى ديني وعلى أهلي وعلى أولادي وعلى مالي وعلى أصحابي وعلى أديانهم وعلى أموالهم ألف لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. بسم الله وبالله ومن الله وإلى الله وعلى الله وفي الله ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. بسم الله على ديني وعلى نفسي وعلى أولادي. بسم الله على مالي وعلى أهلي. بسم الله على كل شيء أعطانيه ربي. بسم الله رب السماوات السبع ورب الأرضين السبع ورب العرش العظيم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله خير الأسماء لا في الأرض ولا في السماء. بسم الله أفتتح وبه أختتم. الله 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 ربي لا أشرك به شيئا. الله 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 لا إله إلا الله الله عز وأجل وأكبر مما أخاف وأحذر. بك اللهم أعوذ من شر نفسي ومن شر غيري ومن شر ما خلق ربي وذرأ وبرأ. وبك اللهم أحترز منهم وبك اللهم أعوذ من شرورهم وبك اللهم أدرأ في نحورهم وأقدم بين يدي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. ومثل ذلك عن يميني ومثل ذلك عن شمالي ومثل ذلك أمامي ومثل ذلك من خلفي ومثل ذلك من فوقي ومثل ذلك من تحتي ومثل ذلك محيط به. اللهم إني أسألك لي وله من خيرك بخيرك الذي لا يملكه غيرك. اللهم اجعلني وإياهم في عبادك وعيالك وعيالك وجوارك وأمانتك وحزبك وحرزك وكنفك من كل شيطان وسلطان وإنس وجان وباغ وحاسد وسبع وأقرب وحية ومن كل دابة أنت ربي آخذ بناصيتها. إن ربي على صراط مستقيم. حسبي الله حسبي الخالق من المخلوقين حسبي الرازق من المرزوقين حسبي الساتر من المستورين حسبي الناصر من المنصورين حسبي القاهر من المقهورين حسبي الذي هو حسبي من لم يزل حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. حسبي الله من جميع خلقه ولي الله الذي نزل الكتاب وبه الصالحين. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. وإذا قرأت القرآن جعلنا بينك وبين الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة حجابا مستورا وجعلنا على قلوبهم أكنة أن يفقهوا وفي آذانهم وقرا. وإذا ذكرت ربك في القرآن وحده ولوا على أدبارهم نفورا. فإن تولوا فقل حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. فإن تولوا فقل حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. فإن تولوا فقل حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. فإن تولوا فقل حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. فإن تولوا فقل حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. فإن تولوا فقل حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. فإن تولوا فقل حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. خبرت نفسي في خزائن الله أقفالها فتأتي بالله مفاتيحها لا قوة إلا بالله. يدافع بك اللهم عن نفسي لا أتيك وما لا أتيك لا طاقة بمخلوق مع قدرة الخالق. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. طيب بسم الله. How are you today? بسم الله. All right, Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Welcome everyone. Alhamdulillah, we're very happy and honored tonight to have Zienab as our guest, Zienab Abdelgany. This is an idea, as I mentioned last week, that I've been having for a little while, that every so often it would be nice to break from our Sunday programming to have a conversation with a community member about various things. And Zienab is someone who, alhamdulillah, we have a little bit of history with. So we were having a conversation, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, I don't know how long ago it is now, maybe a month ago. And, you know, this idea came up, so we said, let's try it. So, bismillah. Many things could be said about Zienab, that she is an Abdelgany, that's first. And she, you know, grew up here in Orange County, Irvine area, and then went to Berkeley. She also did a master's in divinity at Harvard. and she worked as a community organizer for the Greater Boston Interfaith Group. Yeah. And then has returned, alhamdulillah, back home to the promised land of Southern California, her and her husband Ramsey and their beautiful baby Yahya, right? So when I was saying earlier that when we were here and Zainab walked in and I told her, did you have a chance to look at the questions that I sent you? And she was like, you sent me questions? And then I told her that I didn't. So there's no preparation in this conversation. I shouldn't say it that way. There's been lots of thought that's gone into this conversation, but I haven't given her any chance to prepare for it. So she's placed a lot of trust in this conversation right now. Hopefully it won't get broken. So what I would like to do, now I'll give you that idea, is I want to walk through the various stages of your life that brought you here. So we can talk a little bit maybe about your upbringing, some of your formative experiences in the community. So we want to explore two major themes. First major theme is your relationship with the religion itself. Second major theme is your relationship with the community, whatever that means. And it's a very nebulous conceptualization. So maybe like a little bit of that in your formative years growing up, and then in MSA, and then in Boston. We have to spend some time in Boston because Shaykh Yasser was there, Fahmi. And then you know, dig around over there, and then hopefully that will come and speak to some of what you're doing now, which I forgot your title because mashallah it's very long.
It's a senior manager of
programs and community organizing at Care Greater Los Angeles. Oh, that is here, mashallah. Alhamdulillah. Good to see you. So yeah, let's start with your younger years, some of your reflections around your understanding of religion, your experiences with community, so on and so forth. What things do you think really helped you, maybe? Stuff like that. And then we'll see where it goes from there.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Oh, assalamu alaikum. See my neighbor, Dr. Rashad. How's everybody doing? It's good to be home in Irvine. This is home. I was born in Patterson, New Jersey. I moved to Irvine when I was 4 years old. So I spent the vast majority of my time in this little suburban paradise here that you are all situated in. I think when I think about formative experiences growing up, all right, where to start? No. I mean, we're gonna stumble through this, inshallah. But I think, so grew up in a pretty practicing household, alhamdulillah. My mom was someone who grew up in Sharia, in the Nile Delta region of Egypt, and had just really strong set of social values. Like this idea in Egyptian culture of usul was like very big for her. Like you have to be a person of usul, and that meant certain kinds of give and take and reciprocity inside of our lives and neighborliness. And my mom is the person who organizes the picnics. She really is, she's kind of a linchpin of the community in her own right, in terms of being kind of socially weaving a bunch of kids together when we were young, Muslim kids together when we were young, making sure that we had a strong Muslim community around us socially. And then my dad was somebody who, he grew up in Cairo. He followed his family to New Jersey and sort of rebuilt his life here. And he's somebody who was always sort of in and out of the masjid growing up, was teaching Quran when we were young. And we constantly saw that example of Baba sort of in the masjid, Baba teaching things. And he was very also intent on, our bedtime stories were the Prophet stories. And those were important. And I was really into them. I don't know how much my siblings were. I was really into them. They were our superheroes growing up. And so that was my parents and the foundation that they gave me. And I think that serious reflection about Islam started as like with many young people as a teenager, right? You start to mature, you start to get your own friend group, and maybe rebel a little bit. And I was quite the nerd in high school. And I liked class. I liked my teacher. I spent a lot more time with my teachers than my peers. And the peers that I chose at school were people who were concerned about the world. They were, in the ways that you can be in the suburban setting that we lived in, which was like, you know, they were part of the ACLU club, they were part of the Human Rights Club, like they were people who studied and had himma and all of those good things, alhamdulillah. And being a nerd is a protection as a teenager. I really believe that. I remember that experience, and I remember starting to go to youth group at the masjid at the same time as a teenager. And it was fun, it was fine. But I remember having the impression of just like, I feel like I'm not concerned about the same things as the kids in this youth group. Because I remember a lot of conversation about prom. I remember a lot of conversation about nail polish. I remember a lot of conversation about Halloween and a lot of do's and don'ts. And it's not that I didn't, come to that. My mom convinced us that we were too cool for all of those things anyways. So like, I think, alhamdulillah, she's psychologically very cunning. But I think, my mom had convinced us we were all too cool for those things. So I had kind of bigger, more worldly concerns as a 16-year-old. And I was looking around at my peers and I was wondering, you know, where are the other kids who want to make a difference, who are Muslim? And what about the Prophet's stories, right? Like who's trying to live out those stories? So I didn't find a lot of inspiration, frankly, and I don't mean to be denigrating it, in the folks that were around me at my age at that time. But I did see inspiration sort of in an older generation of folks. UCI's MSU was sort of right around the corner. And they were a little bit legendary, like they were a little legendary. So they were, this was really directly post 9/11. And I remember sort of the older kids in our community, college students in our community, you had people like, I'm just gonna name like the Jazar, who was like, so he's the son of my Arabic and Quran teacher, Tanta Ghazwa. And he would like check our Quran. He would basically give us a pass every time for our very bad hifz, and tell Tanta Ghazwa we did great, even though we did terribly. But Laith was a college student at that time. And I remember him telling us stories and hearing these whispers of like being detained and interrogated for like going and studying abroad. There was a lot of stories about surveillance. This was around the time of Monte. And so kids in our community who were like going to get discount gym membership with this new convert in our community were suddenly being approached with we're ultimately being entrapped, right? Or there were attempts at entrapping them. They were too smart for them, inshallah. And there's one person whose family member is here tonight. I think I heard a story of him running on the treadmill next to this guy, and they start talking about politics. And he's like, yeah, you know, there's this, isn't everything that's happening in the war on terror so messed up? We should really do something about it. He, being an 18-year-old kid, was like, yeah, what do you think we should do? Protest? What's it called? Petition? Boycott? Right. And he was like, you know, I'm thinking more of a bomb plot. And of course, he goes and reports this. This is one of many sort of reports of shady behavior from that individual that affected really kind of my older brother's generation and older. Folks who were kind of, the folks who were a little bit older than me at that time. but I remember observing them and observing the reactions that they had, and the sense of like, they had this pride in their Muslim identity. They were negotiating worker contracts on campus. They were doing stuff with the Latino community on campus, and people who were part of other communities were starting to read the Quran because of how inspired they were by this group of young people. And that left an impression on me, a big impression on me. So I remember that. I remember being inspired by these high school students who were in all the human rights clubs on campus, but who were like self-proclaimed agnostics and atheists. And yeah, I think being a teenager, I really grappled with, if it weren't for the example of those older people, I would have struggled a lot and really wondered, does our religion have a vision of social change? Like, are we about that? Because it would have been otherwise. I wouldn't have had that example if it weren't for the kids at UCI. So, alhamdulillah, I owe a lot to them, and I think about them a lot, and I make dua for them a lot. Even though a lot of the stuff, sort of looking back, they would say, yeah, no, we were a little bit we're kind of extreme, we were a little misguided, but no, they showed me a vision of pride in Islam that really stuck with me till college. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Is that what you were looking for?
That's great.
Okay.
So, all right. So one of the reasons why I think these kind of things are important is because this conversation is because a lot of times we sit up here and we teach, and that gives you like one idea of what it means to be part of the community and engaged and so on and so forth. But when other people come, you get to see different models of what that can look like. And that's tied into what she said. So particularly about the point of when you looked up and you saw this generation of young people right above you, and there was a model in that. And I think that one of the most important things actually in a community is this layering of generations in a sense. So it's not just like, okay, there's the Imam, and the Imam is coming up with all of this programming or whatever. That's actually probably not as important as having layers of generations of people who are committed, and they're spending time with each other, or at least they're engaging with each other at some level. Maybe they're related, so they hear stories, maybe they were neighbors, whatever it might be. But there's some sort of connection between these people, because, like, for example, when I was in college and we were in San Diego, one of the big things that you would see with like the younger kids is that they want to hang out with the MSA people, right? The college MSA people, the high school people. So you see this connection there. Whereas so then this person who's in college can tell the person in high school something that the older person can't. It might even be the same thing, but it's just, there's a relationship there that allows, there's a proximity there that makes that possible, right? That wouldn't be possible otherwise. So that's, and of course, as you mentioned, that had a big impact on things that came afterwards. So all of this is somewhat new for me because I meet you after Berkeley, I think, right? After Berkeley, we meet you after Berkeley, before Harvard. So let's go to Berkeley. There was a rumor that was said to me that you were the first female MSA president at Berkeley. Is that true?
Allegedly.
And allegedly, there's no data on this, but maybe if you could share some of your Berkeley experiences with us, and then we'll transition to post Berkeley and then to Harvard.
Berkeley. I don't know. This movie. Where's this movie? This movie went to Berkeley with me. Okay. Feel free to add anything I miss. So, what was Berkeley like? I think. Well, first I decided to go to Berkeley because I needed to leave this bubble. And my parents were really supportive of that, alhamdulillah. And I needed to kind of see something different, see a community that was different. And I remember in my college visit, walking onto Sproul Plaza, there's just like visible homelessness everywhere. There's a bunch of students that have their causes. So Sproul Plaza is sort of like this main hub of activity. And there's a bunch of people with tables. and all these folks who are part of organizations that have causes, and they come up to you while you're walking down Sprout Plaza to like evangelize you around their cause, right? Their political cause. And it was, the visit, there was this sense of healthy discomfort. Like, there are things I need to see and experience here that I haven't, that I need in order to grow. And alhamdulillah, like we had the means to be able to do so. And I went to Berkeley. I ended up being really active with the Muslim Student Association, in the example of my predecessors. I became known as that girl who was always talking about what the MSU UCI does. And I was there from 2008 through 2012. My second year, so there was like an academic sort of formation at Berkeley, and then there was that impacted my spirituality in interesting ways. And then there's like the community and spiritual formation at Berkeley. And I think Berkeley was the most important thing that I did while I was at Berkeley was I became the Sister Social Director for the MSA. And in our MSA Constitution, literally it is written in our MSA Constitution, the job of the Sister Social Director is to be every sister's best friend in the MSA. And so I was like on a mission, chasing any woman that was visibly Muslim that I could find on campus, getting her number, making small talk, and trying to fulfill the constitutional duty of the Sister Social Director. Thank you. And subhanAllah, when you become friends with people, you get to carry a bunch of their problems. And I remember getting called to resolve things I was very underqualified to solve. Everything from like, I remember the second month as a Sister Social Director, I get called up for a gym problem. Like the fourth month, there's like issues of domestic abuse that folks are dealing with that somehow I am now, you know, I know, I wanted to be their best friend. Trying to deal with as a 20-year-old, right? 19 or 20-year-old in college. And it felt like a huge trust. And the Sisters and Brothers Social Director position were known as the most demanding positions and the ones that would land you in therapy at the end of the year for the things that you were trying to do and carry in the community. But at the same time, honestly, I think it was like a very especially blessed time of my life. Like a time of just so many futuhat and openings in my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yeah, seeing him through people. And seeing him by trying to fulfill some idea of what that we had. That we had some ideal of of true brotherhood, sisterhood. The community at Berkeley was much more diverse than the community that I had grown up in, religiously, ethnically, racially, socioeconomically. And that also really opened my eyes to the diverse realities of our community beyond sort of just what I had experienced as mostly middle class, immigrant Arab woman, or young woman, among others, very, very much like me. It opened up my eyes to what Muslim concerns are. And they were student debt. There are people who are dealing with really serious problems from domestic violence to their families being impacted by mass incarceration to not being fearful of deportation, right? Like those were the kinds of realities that I was exposed to that I had never been exposed to before. And they came through relationships of sisterhood with other people in our MSA. And that was important for me. I think the other thing that was important during this time was I got introduced to sort of an academic way of thinking about the world. So Berkeley is kind of the home and original place of ethnic studies, right? Your third world studies major, right, Shaykh Jamaal? Okay, I'm curious to know what that was like and how that shaped you. But for me, I think there was this ethnic studies department, and I was taking a lot of classes. I was doing international development, but a lot of it is it's third world studies ultimately. And I think that shaped the way that I looked at the world. It gave me a language for certain experiences of racism growing up, right? I remember taking this class on Orientalism, and I was like, oh, that's the word, right? That's the word for all of the white ladies in our interfaith spaces who are like, why do you put that on your head? And did your parents force you to wear it? And I was like, oh, there's a word for this. It's called Orientalism. Okay, cool. And it was very empowering to have a vocabulary to describe certain experiences of injustice, both as a Muslim woman whose identity is like racialized in the world, right? But then also as a woman. So there was, I remember taking the sort of transnational feminism class and learning about this thing called patriarchy. And that was also a whole experience. And yeah, and then on top of that, I was in these sort of spaces of solidarity with other communities of color. And it's the same stuff today, right? I mean, like, it's the same discourse today, where a lot of identity politics, a lot of conversations about privilege, a lot of sort of going into that space with Muslim as more of a racial and ethnic identity than it was a spiritual identity. So that was sort of the beginning of a tension I was feeling between like the Muslim I was in sort of MSA spaces where there was like a whole Muslim meant something very holistic. And then in these social justice spaces that I cared about very deeply and believed were part of my mission, but there was a little bit of a flattening of like what Islam is, while at the same time being very, helping me form a vocabulary about injustice in the world. But I don't know, I mean, you go in, people ask you to do your gender pronouns, like, I don't know, what are we doing here? Oh, yeah. Oh, we started it in Berkeley. Oh, you didn't have that? No, Berkeley, well, this is UC Berkeley. 2005. Okay, yeah. I think, this is the home of where a lot of that begins. So yeah, even back then, they were asking us for our gender pronouns. There are a lot of confusing things that kept Muslims away, but we tried to be in that space. We tried to be ourselves. We tried to be fully Muslim, but also it was hard and there were challenges. And I think that foreshadowed sort of more of that as I grew into sort of this activist space. Yeah.
I feel like all this is really looking up to the next period.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yeah. Do you want?
Do you have anything? Yeah. This is good.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. Let me see it real quick.
Yes.
So I'm like using it like that.
All right, so this, then you're there until 2012. 2012, you graduate, you come back to Orange County.
Yes.
And that must have been like exactly when I started, actually.
Yes.
June 2012 is when I started at ICOI. For my stint that everyone seems to think was way longer than it actually was. I was only there for 2.5 years, if you guys can believe that. And I left there 7 years ago now. And like, can anyone remember that? Like, I actually left ICOI December 2014. Right? It was the end of 2004, 7 years ago now. My math, we're 2021, right? Yeah. I was only there for 2.5 years, but alhamdulillah, it was a good time. And Zienab has just come back. And I remember some sort of like gatherings in our living room, Muslima, and trying to like figure out some sort of care thing. Actually, you were with care then too.
Yeah.
Okay. So And how long were you back before you went to Boston? 3 years. Okay. So just so you guys know, the Boston piece is really important to me. Number one, because of Ramsey. And number two, because the Imam in Boston was not what he was, the Imam, and he is a close friend of ours, Shaykh Yasser Fahmy. So like when Zainab, when we found out that she was going to Boston, we were happy because we were like, alhamdulillah, he's there. This is a good thing. So let's go through this period. Let's see what you have.
So I can skip right to.
Whatever you think.
Okay.
You don't have to like.
Okay. I came back. I worked at CARE. I tried to do some things that I worked really closely actually with Shaykh Jamaal Diwan to put together the Muslim Game Changers Network. There are a couple of alumni in the room actually. Omeida's here. Omeida's was a Muslim Game Changer. Wajid, did you do it too or no? Manish. So we put together this 4-month social justice curriculum. I remember asking you guys questions like, okay, how do we talk about this in Islam? Can you tell me some stories from the Seerah about like wealth and privilege and this and that?
Super fresh too, right? Like,
Yeah.
It just came back.
Yeah, no, and it was great, alhamdulillah. And I think MGN was a first attempt to sort of articulate my first attempt to bring together my worlds at Berkeley, right? There was this critical lens of sort of ethnic studies that I got at Berkeley that gave me a way of analyzing injustice, but it was missing some things and it misled in some ways. And I wanted to remedy that and also make sure that there was grounding from our Seerah, right? And so that was the focus of our gatherings as I was putting together this 4-month curriculum. And it was good to work at CARE. I loved working with the high school students that I worked with. But also I was starting to, so I remember going to a summer camp that involved a lot of kids that had been through my MGM program. And I remember hanging out with them and I was just like, I spent 4 months with you. What did you learn? Like, there was a lot of disrespect towards the elders in the room. There was a lot of just like materialism, like a culture of narcissism. Just and I was just I felt like you can't just take an anti-racism workshop and sprinkle some stories from the Seerah on it and like expect a different result, you know? And I think it was that summer camp. I literally cried. Unfortunately, I cried at the summer camp. And I was, Yeah, I did cry at that summer camp. And I just thought, am I really creating game changers? People, am I really cultivating reflective agents of change in the world? Or I think it felt like what they had really gained from me was like a clever way of describing the world. Like they could make, some vocabulary. Like they could make some clever jokes about how reverse racism doesn't exist. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're so smart, Mashallah. Like, but there wasn't reflection. There wasn't character. And I think that was the point at which I was like, I need to go get more serious about studying the tradition. And because all of this is worthless if like I just have like clever people come out of this program who have a new vocabulary, but who haven't transformed themselves enough to transform anything around them. So I think that was a little bit of a reckoning for me. Not to discard what was done. Not to discard what was done. It had some good impacts here and there, but I think and there was two perspectives from which it was ineffectual. Like one is like the moral formation of young people, but then the second was impact, like and yeah, it just felt like we were all sitting in a room, like generating a shared vocabulary with each other with which we could only speak to each other. And did
Wow,
we?
what is this thing? Can you say that sentence?
Okay. It just felt like we were all in a room together trying to cultivate a vocabulary of social justice with each other that we could only speak to each other. And I think, it was around that time that actually Maria invited me to come see an action that was hosted by 1LA. Do you guys, were you guys there? It was a big assembly. Okay, maybe not. So Maria at that time was doing, Maria Banji, our good friend, was doing a fellowship with 1LA. And I was invited to go to Los Angeles as a guest to this public action that was happening. And I walk into this room and there's like 3,000 people from across Los Angeles. It's the most diverse room of people I've ever seen from across LA. It's Black and brown and white, it's Muslim and Christian and Jewish and just people of conscious. Mostly religious congregations, some schools, some unions. And they start the whole thing. And it's, so all these people at the very front, there are the 4 LA mayoral candidates at the time. And I remember they started the whole thing with the ritual we call roll call. And what that means is every organization that's present in the room stands up. All of their numbers stand up and they announce the number of people they had planned to bring and how many people they actually turned out to the event. And so it's like East LA High School, like we had a goal of 340 people to bring 340 people and we brought 412. And then their school band busts out with trumpet fanfare, okay? And this is, they go through like a good 50 organizations in the room. So this isn't like some Twitter event that went viral. This was like premeditated, this is organized. This is organizing, yes.
Viral stuff.
Yeah. And
then they're like, SoCal Muslims. We plan to have 2 people here, and we brought out 2. All of the communities of Muslims in SoCal. This is gonna come back later.
Yeah, no, we were
We're gonna come back to this.
So after they did roll call, you could already see the politicians up front are shaking in their boots, right? And then they have a bunch of ordinary people go up to the front and they tell their stories of struggling with access to public transportation, the quality of schools. I think jobs was another one of the issues, and housing was the 4th. And they had ordinary people go up, tell their stories about their struggles within these issue areas. And then they ask a very specific question of the 4 politicians on stage. They say, if you are elected mayor of Los Angeles, will you put X amount of money into creating Y number of new bus lines? And they have to answer with yes or no. And they get 1 minute of open comments. And they got yeses on all 4 of their issues. And then there's the pastor who stands up and who talks about Musa alayhi salam. And I'm like, yes, my bedtime stories. And she talks about our exodus to a new kind of city. And I remember this feeling of, it just feels good to hear our prophet stories as something transformative in the world, and our faith as something transformative in the world, and not just something I want people to tolerate and accommodate. And so I caught the organizing bug in that room. And I enrolled in the same fellowship that Maria did the next year while I was at CARE. CARE invested in having me do that program and get that training. And eventually, I think the other factor that went into my decision to go to grad school was I wanted to make a pivot kind of full-time into this world of organizing. I had learned a lot about education, about youth development, about putting together curriculum, but I wanted to expand my impact to try something different. And community organizing felt like the space that I wanted to be in. So for those 2 reasons, I ended up going to the Harvard Divinity School in part so that I could work with Marshall Gant, who is the professor of organizing at the Kennedy School. He's a sort of international community organizing teacher, and he does like he came out of the United Farm Workers movement, he came out of the Civil Rights movement, has a framework. He's sort of the architect behind the Obama campaign, the architect behind the Dreamers campaign, and wanted to study under him. Alhamdulillah, I got the chance to do that, in addition to whatever Islamic studies I was going to do at Harvard as well.
Okay. All right. This was all the warm up. In second was you're just warming it up. So you're coming out of Irvine. And this is like, Irvine was probably much less developed then. Even when I came to Irvine, there was no Stonegate. Stonegate? There was no Cypress Village. There was no East thing, whatever that East thing is. There was no Orchard Hills. Not when I came to Irvine, 2012. None of that stuff was here. So it was a completely different world. And you want to get out of the bubble. You go to Berkeley, see all kinds of crazy stuff. I remember the first time I went to Berkeley as an undergrad. And I remember thinking to myself, this is the kind of place where you carry a knife. That was actually the first thought that went through my head when I walked around Berkeley. It's a really bad thing to think. But anyways, so you go to Berkeley, you get all of this experience, these things, you come here working on the ground, and you see this one LA thing. Thank you. Is it okay if if you tell me if you agree with this recommendation?
Yeah.
I think people should read the book Going Public.
Yes.
Geekin, is it?
Mike Egan.
Mike Geekin, Going Public. It's very short, it's very easy. You get some really good concepts. This story that Zienab shared about the work groups coming together and the way they did it and everything will make more sense. No, I shouldn't say it that way. You'll understand it better if you read the book. So you do all those things and you go to Harvard Divinity School. Now, I know in retrospect, Shaykh Yasser's opinion of Harvard Divinity School. So tell us what you found there. Obviously, you got the community organizing stuff that you maybe, at least some of what you were looking for.
Yeah.
Of course, there's an Islam side to it as well. And then there's your experience in the community there, and then working into your actual job as an organizer.
Looking at Zawar, because Zawar went with me to Harvard Divinity. So yes, I think that I went to Harvard thinking like, I need some like grand, I need like an Islamic liberation theology, you know, like I need some like grand theological like thesis that brings together all these ideas. And what I found at Harvard Divinity School was like a lot of spiritually confused people. And I think that what Harvard Divinity School really exposed to me was just yes. Okay, so I'll say this. I had my roommates, not my roommates. I had people in my network who were kind of taking the classes that were offered on feminism in Islam, and most of those were taught by folks who had kind of a revisionist idea of the tradition, right? And there was a lot of that in Harvard, both among the students, but then also the faculty. But at the same time, there were classes that I got to take on with Sheikh Osman Khan, who comes sort of out of a Tijani lineage. And he taught us, we basically got to read all of the Ihya Ulum ad-Din in English, which was awesome, alhamdulillah, and do like weekly reflections on it. We had a really awesome chaplain come, Sheikh Khalil, who Abdur Rashid, who studied in Turkey, who was really grounded. And I saw that the spiritual experiences of people at Harvard Divinity depending on sort of the coursework that they chose, the places, the circles they were a part of, the professors that they had was either one of like straying into a very revisionist idea of Islam and core tenets that have been sort of historically accepted for centuries around LGBTQI stuff, around hijab, around all kinds of things. Or people who were sort of like looking at all of that and holding very tight to the tradition and trying to create a path for themselves that where they could get some learning done within the tradition in a way that felt authentic and in a way that was true to how we study. And alhamdulillah, in my second year, I think I did a field education placement with Imam Bilal Ansari, who was at that time at Zaytuna. It was the last time he was at Zaytuna. And he sat me down and he explained Hadith Jibreel to me, actually. And he was like, so what Islamic studies have you done? And I was like, Sirah, like Tafsir? And he was like, you have named none of the 3 core sciences, Zienab. Like, and I was like, what 3 core sciences? And he was like, well, let's go over Hadith Jibreel. And this is where he basically explained to me that there's a blueprint for the study of Islam, right? That there's Islam, there's our fiqh, there's our aqidah, and there is tasawwuf or tazkiyah, right? And there's the source sciences, and then there's the waqt and how we place that within a context. And he was sort of the first person to introduce me to this, to look at my course list and to say, so this was after my first year, actually. So he took my course list and he was like, you should take this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and you should not take the rest. And it was, I think that Hadith Jibreel just became a theme throughout the 3 years that I was in college. It just kept coming back over and over again through Shaykh Yasser. And then Shaykh Yasser was at ISBCC, which was the big masjid in Roxbury. And he did a whole intensive on Hadith Jibreel and the study of the tradition. And in addition to sort of laying out these core sciences, the way that Islam has been studied for centuries, he has this beautiful packet. I hope he one day publishes it. Where, oh, you have it? Yeah. It's beautiful, yeah. Where he also sort of lays out the introductory texts that people go through, the intermediate texts and advanced texts. And I felt robbed, honestly, at that time. I was like, why didn't anyone ever explain this to me? Like, I feel like I've just been living on some YouTube version of Islam my whole life, of just like seeking out some inspirational stuff here and there, keeping up the ruhaniya, keeping up my feelings of spirituality. But there was, nobody taught us how to fish. And like that, there was this well-developed, really intelligent, really sophisticated like system and underpinning behind our whole deen and the study of our deen. And I just scratched the surface of it at Divinity School, right? Like I felt like I took a 3-year survey course, but it's there. And I think I ended up meeting my husband at a Ulum al-Quran class that I took actually at Boston, and everybody should do it. But yeah, I mean, it's in addition to this, like to the 3 core sciences, we all need to take a class in Ulum al-Quran. We all need a class in Ulum al-Hadith. And I looked at all the confusion that I saw, especially in activist spaces, and the little trust, the very diminished trust that a lot of activists had in our scholarly tradition, right? Because of these ideas, around patriarchy in the tradition, because of these sort of like materialist critiques that were just extended to Islam, right? Without the consideration that Islam does soul work, right? If we dismiss the work of a bunch of male scholars, do we ultimately undermine the whole project of soul work, of people critically examining themselves through the deen, right? Is all of that just fake, and patriarchy is just this overarching, like, yeah, deen, and like, but it's like this reality that erases the possibility of any sincere thinking that can happen and sincere thought production for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think that when you extend that kind of materialist critique, there's just suspicion around the tradition that's like not even founded in a real notion of history, like, or a knowledge of like the way that our sciences were formed, which is really complicated, which was really, I mean, honestly, even just ulum and hadith, you had so many people who are just like, what do we do with like what the Prophet said to us? The Mus'haf as the most basic example, you know, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu didn't know whether or not he should put it together. Like, people had to make creative and brave choices in putting the foundation for what is now our religion, right? And there was tension and there was disagreement, and people were human, but they were trying to maintain the integrity of this tradition. And I think that when I think about it like that, I can relate a lot more to the scholars that ultimately paved the way for this whole thing called ulum and hadith, this whole thing called ulum and Quran. Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right, that's all very good. Shameless plug. What's the date? In 2 weeks, I'm teaching on Monday night, online only, for 3 weeks. I think it will be 3 weeks long. Iman Islam Ihsan, which is Hadith Jibril, with a text from the Hanafi madhab. Okay, it's free. You don't have to do anything. You just have to show up and use your mind for an hour and a half for 3 weeks, inshallah. Hopefully we'll finish it in 3 weeks. Ustad Fuad also did this, his last class before this one. He did the same thing for the Maliki school. So we're trying to cover the 4 madhabs. Inshallah, we'll get someone to do the other 2 as well. There is a lot more to this whole thing than people realize. Even when we talk about ulum and hadith sciences, most hadith sciences is very Shafi'i in its approach. It doesn't even like scratch the surface of how the Hanafis and the Malikis dealt with hadith. Which is a whole different, I shouldn't say whole different, but it's not necessarily exactly the same. So okay, there's a lot there. So you go scratching the surface. Kind of trying to, it sounds like, figure out how can I do this community organizing thing, do something for the world, at the same time have some level of integrity and in terms of my commitment to what I believe in. And this is the thing about like all of the sciences of Islamic studies, by the way, what are they really trying to do in the end? They're trying to teach us how we can have integrity with our sources. Like, okay, you say you believe in the Quran. You say you believe in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How do you engage with those sources with some level of integrity? Meaning, it's not just like, oh, I like this thing, I'll do this. I don't like this thing, I won't do that. I'm going to interpret this however I feel like. They didn't want to do that, because if you're going to say, I believe in the Quran, I believe it's the word of God, it's coming from God, God's telling me how I should live my life. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of God. He tells me what I'm supposed to do. I believe that. Okay, so if I believe that, then there's a level of submission in that. And if I'm going to have that submission, then I need to be able to engage with the sources in a way that's systematic, that in doing so limits my personal biases in a sense. Okay, it's not that they go away, but it tries to limit them. So we'll leave it. Yeah. So, you know, that's I think it's. Yeah. Anyways, we don't need to get into Islamic studies. We're focusing on Zainab right now. So this is Zainab's now. So you're doing all these things. You're going through this stuff. I know that at the same time, we won't necessarily open it, but at the same time, let's see. So you finish school, you start to work in the community? Did you go straight to the GBI? Okay. And where does this fit into the timeline of Shaykh Yasser Fahmy getting pushed out of the masjid by a board that didn't know what they were doing? Just so we can be clear on the realities of American Islam.
Okay, I should say salam alaikum to Shaykh Yasser. This goes viral through the whole community in New Jersey now.
Yeah,
sure.
Manish. It's good, you know, if he's too polite to say these things,
Okay,
I'll say them
all right.
because he's my friend, and what they did was wrong. You know, like someone goes and they actually know what they're doing, which in itself is actually more rare than you think it is. And they've had life experiences that prepares them to do the work that they were doing. And then they put their whole life into that community for years. And then like just shadiness. It's horrible. May Allah forgive us. And he used to say, you know, there's a hadith the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and fitna na'ima, al'anallahu min ayqadaha. Or la'anallahu min ayqadaha. There's a different, like fitna is sleeping, and may the curse of Allah be on the one who wakes it up. It's a hadith. It's very scary. But like this is, you know, this is the reality there. So you're going through all of these things. Part of what's interesting, I think, about ISBCC too, is that Yusufi was the director, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it was like a Jama'ah thing. They all left. But Yusufi was a community organizer. Right? I remember when I first went to Boston and I met Yusufi, and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like he's the director of the masjid, but he's a community organizer. What an interesting thing, right? So let's hear.
Now that I cross this place up.
By all means. So while I was at grad school, I was doing field work with the ISBCC. Shaykh Yasser had just come on. Ramzi and I took lots of classes with him. Like I said, I think he really helped ground me in a time when could have been could have been very lost. I think I was learning organizing with Marshall Gans, and I was also doing field work. So with the ISBCC, but also the ISBCC was a member organization in the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, which was 1LA's sister organization in Los Angeles. They're all part of a national organization called the Industrial Areas Foundation that has been doing this kind of organizing since the 1940s. Some of you may or may not have heard of the name Saul Alinsky. He is sort of the founder of the IAF nationally, and he started doing the first experimentations with this model of organizing in Chicago with a bunch of unions and a bunch of Catholic churches, really. The GBIO, where I ended up working in Boston, had, alhamdulillah, they had a track record before I had gotten there, which made me all the more attracted to the work that they do. They actually were the ones who had helped organize, Romney Care in Massachusetts, which became the model for Obamacare nationally, the Affordable Care Act nationally. So had managed to, alhamdulillah, do big campaigns. You know, that's like 500,000 residents that were uninsured or underinsured were now covered because of the work that they did to organize people across their member organization. So the way that the GBI, do you want me to talk about, well, where should I start? No, that's okay. Let's not go too organizery. Let's, what do you want me to focus on?
Maybe this is a good way to transition into like maybe how this kind of organizing can be useful for
Oh, within the community.
things you learned there.
Yes, yeah,
Not just internally, but
yeah,
for the Muslim community.
for the Muslim community broadly.
Like how did you find your niche in terms of your religion, space?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I loved about working with the GBIO is when I was working with other people of faith, and the sort of like foundational tool of organizing is this thing called the relational meeting. So the secret sauce behind lots of campaigns, very successful campaigns that represent millions and billions of public dollars that are won by organized people is really this tool, the relational meeting, the one-to-one relational meeting. all organizers in the IF will swear by it as very fundamental. And the first thing that I was assigned to do as a new organizer was I was assigned to do a bunch of one-to-one relational meetings inside the ISBCC, the masjid there in Roxbury. And I'll start, let's see where to start. I think the approach, it was very life-giving, first of all, to do a bunch of, I felt like the sister social director again, but with boundaries. And I had an excuse to call people up and say, hey, you're an important person in the community. Can I talk to you about what motivates you and what you care about? And to sit down with them and to ask them about their life and to tell them a little bit about my life and to build a base that way, like to build a base of people that were interconnected through their stories and by really knowing what makes, you know, Obeida click, like what keeps Obeida up at night is the question that I'm trying to answer if I'm doing a relational meeting with Obeida. And I think I did like 230 of those in the ISBCC. Yeah. It was a lot. And I ended up working, I think the first campaign that I worked on was with a bunch of Somali aunties. I was the only one who spoke English in that group. And it started with the principal of the Quran school, Sister Firdausa. And she was a pharmacist and she worked at CVS's across the city. And she was really angry that when she went to the CVS in the wealthy neighborhoods of Boston, if the line was longer than 2 people, somebody would call and complain, and then they would have to bring in another additional pharmacist. But then when you were in Hyde Park or Roxbury or Dorchester, which are sort of the low income neighborhoods with largely communities of color, you would have lines at the pharmacy going to the door, and people would just take it. And she said, "I'm sorry, I'm so tired of people who look like me just taking it. And I'm tired of the Somali community that I work with on Sundays just taking it." And they had this, so she was like, I want to work with you. After our first relational meeting, she said, I'm going to introduce you to 10 more moms. So meet me at the park on Friday morning. I went to the park on Friday morning. She introduces me to 10 Somali moms. They're all speaking Somali. I have no clue what's going on. For those who's translating the whole thing for me. And they start talking about their kids getting in trouble in the criminal justice system. They start talking about the need for more after school programming. They start talking about the horrible conditions in the public housing that they live in. But we're also sitting in this park and it's pretty beat up. It's the park right next to the masjid. And there's like an unfenced cliff that the kids are playing on. Like there's potholes inside of the playground. There's only one unbroken swing. And on Ramadan nights, you have like 30 kids standing in line at the one unbroken swing in the park. And they were incensed about this. They're like, what is this? Like, our kids deserve better than this. And so I was like, okay, well, if we want to make some change around this or any number of the issues that you all just named, then we'll need more people. And so that group of 10 the following week turned into a group of 25. And then that group of 25, 2 weeks later, turned into a group of 60 women. And they talked about the issues that they were facing in their lives. Much the same, a lot of the same ones came up as the ones that the initial group of 10 had talked about. But we decided and blessed the idea of starting small, starting with a small winnable campaign. And that was the park. Yes, I'm all the hand. And that was the park, because the park was what was going to teach us how to fight together. And if you don't trust each other and you don't know how to fight together, then you're not going to win big stuff, much less. If we can't win this park, we can't win anything. Forget public housing, right? So these 60 women broke up into, we did a research meeting. We broke up into groups of 10. A lot of them couldn't read or write. So we drew pictures of the kind of park that they wanted to see. And that they wanted their children to enjoy on Ramadan nights. And from that, we derived a list of like 15 demands. And they chose a negotiating team from among them. And they went and they tried to talk to the parks commissioner. So we went to their office with these 4 women dressed in abayas. Only one of them spoke English. And he looked them up and down with their abayas. And he said, you can go talk to my secretary, our administrator. So we talked to the administrator. And we knew that he was disrespecting us, but we talked to the administrator. And she said, honestly, if you want, there's a lot of beat up parks in Boston. If you want something done about this, you're gonna have to make some noise. And these women took that as a challenge and they said, challenge accepted. Yeah, and so they brought in, they went and they set up a meeting with the city councilor. And city councilor Kim Janey was part of old sort of like Black royalty in Roxbury. There's like a group of families that have just been there for ages. And she was part of that group of families. And this park was called Jeep Jones Park. And Jeep Jones was the first Black deputy mayor in Boston. Also part of Roxbury's Black royalty. Happened to be the uncle of the chair of the GBIO, Beverly Williams. And Ferdosa, who is the leader of this campaign, propositioned her about becoming the champion of Jeep Jones Park, right? And we have this big action that's coming up. We want to bring out 120 people from the masjid. And will you, and there's going to be a whole 1,000 others from the multi-faith community. Will you come and will you publicly commit to being the champion of Jeep Jones Park in front of all of these people and commit to fixing this place up and building us some new equipment for the older kids to play with? And she loved the idea. And some weeks later, she dragged the parks commissioner by his ear in the middle of the winter to come with our women and do a tour where the women pointed out everything that was wrong inside of the park. And you could just see the look on his face. Yeah, I got you. But yeah, Councilor Janey made that commitment in front of about 1,400 people from the multi-faith community after Ferdosa and the assistant principal of the school next to that park basically did a photo presentation about Jeep Jones Park. We had Jeep Jones actually come and we honored him in front of, we honored him and Kim Janey honored him in front of the crowd. And alhamdulillah, I think they got 67K that right now that they're just working with for the redesign of the park. And they're actively a part of the redesign process right now. So these things take time. The whole process started 3 years ago, but alhamdulillah, like the changes are finally coming through. And that was just our tryout campaign. And what was cool about it was like when we were doing turnout for this big 1,400 person action, it was like the folks in the room who were in relationship with each other hadn't really spoken before. So like you had sort of like young professionals group from the masjid talking to these aunties from the Somali community, talking to some of the other sort of elders and folks who were regular masjid goers for the 5 daily prayers, and all of them had to commit to bringing out folks, and they were building relationships with each other and hearing each other's stories actually in ways that they had never sat down to do before. And that was just within one masjid. And as we grew and as we brought on more members, it was like, you know, we had the ISVCC, but then we also had the 2 African-American masajid that were historically in Roxbury and Dorchester come on and join as GBIO members, and Mass came on, and there were relationships built between all of those organizations, and that has continued, alhamdulillah. But again, they were relationships and conversations that hadn't been happening before, and that brought people together across historical divides, which was really, really powerful to see.
Yes.
Great. All right. So, huh? Can I get a takbir in here? So when we named this organization the Majlis, we had no idea that the word gets used for all kinds of different things. We didn't even realize some of the connotations of the word. The entire philosophy behind the naming of the organization was, if we're going to do anything as a community, we have to come and sit together. That was the entire philosophy behind the name. Like, people have to come, they have to sit together, they have to get to know each other, they have to talk to each other. If you have a little bit of food, a little bit of drinks, it helps people do that. And that was the main thing. We hold classes was basically like, you hold classes to make sure everyone's on the same page, and it brings people out, and then they can talk to each other. Like, really, they have to talk to each other. And you know, this is one of the things that, like, if a community, I don't mean this as a, just as a disclaimer, this is not a comment on anyone or anything or any place, but like, one of the things that an imam will do if they're in a community is that even if they're not doing what Zienab mentioned intentionally, they're doing what she mentioned in the relational meetings, because the imam is going to meet all kinds of people in the community. Again, ideally there's even a philosophy to it, there's an approach to it, it's being done intentionally, that I'm going to meet as many people as I can in this community. And then, you know, people might look at it and be like, well, what is this imam doing? You're just sitting with people all day long. We want some production, we want some data. Where's our data to judge whether or not they're doing their job, and where are the classes, and where's the enrollment, and how much money is coming in from this and that? It's complete stupidity, actually. I mean, I understand the intent sometimes, but it's wrong, because then they're going to sit with all these people. You're going to have all of these relationships. What's actually holding the community together? It's all those relationships. Right? So you take those, and it takes a lot of work. Like, look what Zienab said. How long is it going to take to do 250 meetings? It'll take a long time. Like, each one of those meetings is going to be probably an hour at least. Every time you do it, you're gonna have to go there, you're gonna have to set it up, you're gonna have to arrange it, you're gonna have to take notes, there's a lot of stuff that goes into meeting that many people. And it really feeds the community, right? The other thing that I think is interesting about community organizing, and why I wanted also Zienab to be with us, is because there's a lot of good things that we can do. Okay? There's a lot of good things that we can do. What we try to do in the Majlis is we're trying to provide an intellectual and spiritual foundation for those good things. It's not necessarily that I'm going to do it myself, or that Muslim is going to do it herself. Maybe we might not be the one to lead that or to do that, or whatever it might be. But the goal is, if we look at Islam, Iman, Ihsan, it gives us the paradigms that we need in order to approach these things. How do I look at the world? Okay, I got that in order. These are the rules that I need to follow. Usually they're not that many. And then what is the spiritual nourishment that I need in order to really do this work? Because you're going to come up against stuff. It's not going to be just like, oh, I want to do something good, and all of a sudden my heart is pure. No, you're going to have like times when you're angry, times when you're jealous, times when you're upset with, you know, you're hating on other people. You're going to have times when your patience is running out. And all of that is going to be fed by a person's spiritual training, their spiritual upbringing, right? So all of that we mentioned, all of her life story that's leading up to this point is speaking to that reality. Like the time in the masjid, the time with the family, the time in the community, the experiences in MSA, the education at Harvard, the people that you work with, the teachers that you might have that help you, so on and so forth. All of that is feeding the person to be able to do this thing. And look at what we're saying. What is it in the end? One lady in a pharmacy was upset, and she got 10 aunties, and 10 aunties turned into 1,500 people, and the park is on its way to getting fixed. That matters, right? Like that matters a whole lot more than most of the debates that we have at our dinner parties, you know, about like, can I trust the hadith or not? Like, have you read anything on hadith? Just leave it alone. Go do something else. There's a lot of homeless people you can help. There's a lot of parks you can fix. There's a lot of people you can organize. There's a lot of things you can do. Not everyone has to do that. We don't have to rehash that over and over again. So, you know, this is all very interesting. Maybe if we can, maybe you can say a little bit about the work that you're doing now, and maybe like any reflections or advice that you have for the community in general. And then if we have some time, maybe we can take a few questions and then we can close, inshallah.
So the work that I'm doing now, so I came back home from that and looked for and got approached by CARE to do some work as a manager of community organizing, to introduce community organizing to to the Muslim community as an approach, this sort of Saul Alinsky community organizing model. And so we are I took a bunch of people who were formerly sort of like outreach people who have gone out and sort of done outreach work in the community to publicize different programs that we have and services. And we're retraining them. And we have a partnership with One LA, which is the Industrial Areas Foundation, the local affiliate, like I mentioned. And they're doing a bunch of relational meetings. So we have 4 sort of focus regions. There's Orange County, Inland Empire, Los Angeles, and the San Fernando Valley. And within each of those, we have sort of 5 to 7 target institutions that we're trying to bring on board to pilot this organizing network. I think that it's going to be called the Muslims, we're debating the name. I hope that we end up with Musa, which is Muslims United for Solidarity and Action, the Musa Network. But the Musa Network, I'm jumping the gun here, but the Musa Network,
This is the current theme.
I know.
Can I say something?
Please, yeah.
We're going to stop on Musa
For a second. Next week, Street Toa Brisket is going to be here. So we want to get an idea of how many meals we should tell them to prepare for the Majlis people. Okay, so I'm going to pass this around. If you want some, then put your name on it, inshallah, so that we can prepare for that, right?
So the Musa Network, named after our social justice exemplary, and we're trying to identify some target institutions who may want to participate in this, and basically do a bunch of relational meetings, to have people do them with each other inside of these institutions, to have our organizers do them with the folks inside of the institution, and to try and build out a base, and then eventually to do some listening campaigns that will lead us to an issue platform, so a set of shared concerns that we can unite around. And we're trying to do that with the full diversity of our community, really being intentional about, where the underserved Muslims and making sure they're included in that conversation as well. And part of the base that we're trying to build out. And then to hopefully do a lot of training in this first year, so that people sort of understand what the project is about. And then to do some kind of a launch in the months leading up to midterm elections in 2022. So that's the hope. I don't know that, in this first year, it's really just about buy-in and people kind of understanding the project and trying something new, because the way that we do politics in our community, I don't know that we actually think about, like, let me relate to, politics is like associated with relating to people around their life stories, relating to people around what motivates them, doing that slowly with a lot of people. But that is what makes for a long-standing and effective base. And, the Parks campaign was my tryout campaign, but alhamdulillah, like, by the time I had left, we had managed, I had helped to organize a campaign after the police murder of George Floyd, and we helped to create the first civilian oversight board in the state of Massachusetts to oversee police standards and certification and police use of force. And we went from being very, very behind as a state of Massachusetts with respect to police accountability to being probably one of the leaders in the nation through this organizing work. And again, the secret sauce was a very strong foundation of relational meetings inside of our member institutions and across our member institutions. And I think one of the things that I would really love for Muslims to be a part of this work. One, because we don't win enough as a Muslim community. Just like, I feel like we need some wins, y'all. I feel like we grew up being told like, oh, okay, victory's in the akhirah. It is, you know, like we can actually win, guys. Like there are things that we can win politically. And secondly, because it's also good for us internally. It's good for us to know each other. And I think that when we know each other, our conception of like what's a Muslim issue also changes a lot, especially if we're connecting across our diversity. And it becomes a lot less our politics become less ideological. It's less about like, yeah, exactly. I remember the first campaign I worked on was with was Prop 47, actually, when I was doing that year that I was doing my fellowship at CARE. And yeah, we did those debates about mass incarceration. But what was more impactful for me was like meeting people in the South LA Muslim community. A 30-minute drive on the freeway. Never been there in my life. Never, subhanAllah. And that was the first time and that was when mass incarceration was not this like, it wasn't just this ideological commitment, right? That was based out of my ethnic studies background. It was like, no, these are brothers and sisters who had years of their lives wasted in a prison because of this injustice done. Like, those are my brothers and sisters. And that's when it becomes personal and a conviction and something you can't, it's not a theory anymore.
The next one's probably going to be with Tabari, in case anyone knows him. You should, but it was going to be in December, but maybe it'll be in January. Speaking of mass incarceration and issues around that. Good. Any advice for the people here, or did you just do it in Project News?
Advice is do relational meetings. Oh, okay. Do relational meetings. And it's not just about base building. It's not just about political issues. It will put barakah in your life. And it is what built, it's a foundation of what, it's us reliving the prophetic gathering, right? We hear these stories of the Prophet, we hear these stories of the Sahaba. And so many of them have been narrated to us because the Prophet was sitting in a circle with them. And he said, Bilal, tell us your story. Tell us about the early days of about the early days of Mecca, right? We wouldn't have those stories if people didn't sit around and share their stories. And the Prophet didn't invite them to do so. So that's the tradition that we are reliving by doing this kind of relational work. I know I personally was raised, there was this ethos of like the Islamic worker, which is like somebody who doesn't have a personality and who doesn't have a background and who doesn't have a story, who's just like doing work. And that's not, but it doesn't have to be like that. Even Musa alayhi salam in the Quran, right? The beginning of his journey of organizing the people, the children of Israel, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recounting to him his own story, right? Look at everything you've been through. It's good for you too. You having to reflect on your own life journey and what shapes your commitments. It's important. It's important for us to figure out what brings us to where we are and why we're committed to what we're committed to. And the more that we do it with each other, the stronger community will be internally, but also externally when we need to fight together to get real things done at that time.
Thank you. All right, there's a quote from Imam al-Haddad about this. I was just pulling it up. Brotherhood and sisterhood for Allah's sake is like a tree. It is irrigated with the water of mutual visiting, and the fruit it bears is working together for the sake of goodness and taqwa. If it is not watered, it will wither, and if it does not bear any fruit, it will be cut down. It's very powerful. I'm going to read it again. Brotherhood and sisterhood for Allah's sake is like a tree. It is irrigated with the water of mutual visiting, and the fruit it bears is working together for the sake of goodness and taqwa. If it is not watered, it will wither, and if it does not bear any fruit, it will be cut down. So what is all of it going back to? It's visiting each other. It's visiting each other. So thank you, Zienab, for taking the time, from your family, from the little one, to be with us. We really appreciate to be. There's a level of vulnerability in just coming and telling your story. There's an added level of vulnerability when the person who asked you to come gives you no insight as to what to expect from the session. So appreciate it, and appreciate you sharing all of your insights and everything. Are there any questions and stuff people would like to share? Yes.
So you mentioned the story about large fear of God is preserving.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So how is that something that
Yeah.
you don't necessarily?
Yeah. So those 1,500, like I said, they didn't come out of like some viral Facebook event. They came from so we had 49 member institutions at the time we did that assembly, and each institution basically committed to bringing out a certain number of people. There is a very organized infrastructure where we had basically 2 leaders who were community captains from each institution that were part of like monthly meetings, and those 2 people were kind of responsible for the nitty-gritty of like mobilizing within their institution. And then there's sort of like a strategy level team leadership that's responsible for political research, the larger strategic vision of the organization, blah, blah, blah. And that also is diverse and comes from across our member institutions and are people who are connected to institutions, which is an important part of this. Yeah. So the 1,500 people weren't random, basically. They were part of an organized base of people and institutions that committed to turnout. And they were brought in by people who helped set expectations, where people knew this wasn't going to be like a free-for-all on stage. This is the agenda that we built, and people have been a part of it in some way, shape, or form. And that campaign wasn't the only campaign that was happening on stage. So there were several others based on the ongoing work of these 49 member institutions, doing lots of listening inside of the community, researching, and then ultimately coming up with issue campaigns, and then bringing targets or decision makers who are responsible for those issues to come and answer to us around our agenda, right? So they didn't come out of nowhere. Like I said, it wasn't a Facebook event that went viral. Everybody had to count how many people came from their church or synagogue or masjid or union, and to orient them and they all sat actually in their own, everybody sat with a sign next to their organization. It's like, that's what it means to have an organized constituency as opposed to like a public action, or, this isn't Occupy Wall Street, where it was like, everybody come out. No, it was, this had been premeditated for months. Yes.
2 powers in the world.
I have a question. Here being able to help candidates run for office, like for example, I don't want to work for the state council. I don't want to dollars. Like probably funny. Fine. But I don't want to do that. Most likely, would here be help with like especially like legal, so many legal items run for office. That's obviously
Yeah, I think so. That falls a little bit more in line with the C4 work that CARE does. I would have a conversation with Hassan Aylish about it, send him, pop him an email, let him know that you're interested in running for office. I can take your contact information afterwards, but yeah, I think that's a little more in line with the C4 work that we do, which is more electoral politics. I'm more excited about the issue-based organizing, which is not about sort of partisan electoral organizing around candidates. It's about issues and holding whoever's in power or wants to be in power responsible for a set of issues that we care about collectively as a community.
Women folk?
Involved in the personal meetings.
What does a relational meeting look like? So relational meeting. Usually what I do when I introduce somebody to so if I was to reach out, what's your name, sister? Amy. Okay, so I would call you up, Amy. And first I would ask Shaykh Jamaal, so it's Amy person, I should talk to her, right?
You
Okay.
should actually.
Absolutely. All right. So I would call up Amy and I would say, Shaykh Jamaal told me that if I really want to understand the Majlis community, I need to sit down and talk with you. Would you mind having coffee with me? We go to Starbucks, we sit down. And I might start by sharing with you one story about that sheds light on why I care about organizing, right? And I'd figure out a little bit more. What do you do in your day job? It's complicated. I would ask you a bunch of questions about why you do what you do, why you care about what you care about, and would try to figure out what you're concerned about, what you see as your concerns for the community, what's your vision for your family, for Majlis. And I would probably ask you, do you have other people who have similar concerns? And can you introduce me to them? And we would sort of like grow organically. I would grow my list of people inside of Majlis that way, and we would find more people to talk to do relational meetings with that way. But it's mostly just a lot of exchange of stories and asking you a lot of why questions. So you made the choice to go to grad school. You made the choice to do this as your side gig. Why? And by doing that, the hope is to get at what we understand is your self-interest, right? But self-interest not in this weird capitalist way, but like, what's the legacy that you want to leave, right? What's the kind of meaning you're trying to inhabit in the world? That kind of thing. And through that, we start to build some trust in a rapport. And we do a lot of those inside of Majlis in order to build a larger base.
Set up those kind of meetings amongst people that you've met with personally, so they would do the same thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Right.
With each other.
With each other. Yeah.
And you're asking why relationally, not interrogation.
Yes. But sometimes a little, yes. And especially if I don't know, so they say agitation without a relationship is just irritation. So I can't be, it's a back and forth. It's a two-way conversation to start to establish some rapport.
Talk about how we can win something.
Yes.
Someone has this idea that victory is in that. Where would you say the root of that attitude?
I think a lot of the fights, honestly, I think we punch above our weight a lot in the Muslim community when it comes to our politics, right? The issues that we care about are so like traditionally Muslim issues, right? What somebody yell out some quote Muslim issues. Palestine. Yeah, okay. That's a big one. That's really, really hard. You're talking about like, we've chosen the hardest political issues to solve as a starting place, right? That would literally require not just a local, we require all of our communities across the country to be organized with allies electorally and on issue politics in order to like make a little bit of change, right, in our foreign policy around Palestine. So many of the issues, even FBI surveillance, right? So many of the issues that we're focused on are resolved on a federal level. But there's this whole host of issues that we could be resolving on the local and statewide scale, right? That actually like are, that's like something we could bite off and chew, you know? We could win some stuff around healthcare. We could win some local immigration fights, right? Maybe around municipal IDs, whatever it is, right? I think that we have been trying to punch above our weight for a long time because the kinds of issues that we've traditionally understood as Muslim issues have been really, really hard to resolve through just one local base. And we're not even organized on the local level, right? And we're trying to resolve national issues. And like, we do baby steps, y'all. Like, can we just like organize us? Like, can we get a city ordinance passed first before we go and, you know, before we go and liberate Palestine? So I think it's about trying to be deliberate about building power one step at a time. All politics is place-based at the end, right? At least in the United States, all politics is place-based. Everybody who's elected has a constituency that elects them. That's based in a specific place. And the more place-based local organizing we do across the country, we could get it right here as a model, right? And other people replicate it, we have a much better chance of trying to resolve some of those national things. But we got to start with what's winnable first. And we have to get organized and disciplined as a base first.
Reflections. That's really good. I think it's actually tied into some of the stuff you said before. Like everything has furu' and usul. Okay, I'll translate. Everything has furu' and usul. Furu' are like branches, usul are foundations. Okay, so, and then there's minor things and there's major things. So kind of what I'm understanding from Zienab is that we don't have furu' and we don't have usul, and we're trying to deal with a major issue. Really. And this problem plays itself out in many different ways in our community, actually. For example, when she was saying earlier, when Imam Bilal sat her down, he was like, so, like, what's the deal with Islamic studies? And she was like, well, I've done some seerah. Yeah. There's like a far, it's a branch out there. It's not on anything. Like in the Islamic studies world, they always say the asl is ma yubna alayhi ghayru. That the asl is that the foundation is what something else is built on top of it. So if you take like a subsidiary thing and it doesn't even have a foundation, there's nothing to be done. There's no, and I think this happens in a lot of things in our community. You know, we want this and we want this and we want this and we want this and we want this. We do it intellectually, we do it spiritually, we do it practically. Someone will say, for example, I really want to memorize the Quran. You're like, okay, you should learn how to read Arabic. And they do like 3 weeks of learning how to read Arabic. They're like, I don't want to, you know, it's too slow for me. I'm going to start memorizing. So they start memorizing. And then 2 months later, they're like, I'll never memorize the Quran. Inshallah, in the Akhirah, I'll learn the whole Quran. Like, I'll know the whole Quran in the Akhirah. We'll get the victory in the Akhirah. We can't get the victory here. Was it that they can't get the victory here, or was it because the process wasn't done properly? And and people, like, one of the things that you'll hear, I harp on this all the time. Ustad Fuad will harp on this all the time. Shaykh will harp on this all the time. The methodology matters. It's not a secondary issue. It's not just like, oh, why do they talk about methodology all the time? Can't we just like move on with it? Yeah, like when we would go in Azhar, it's a famous thing everyone will always say. When you go to take a class in Azhar, they spend like forever on the introduction. And once you get past the introduction, everything moves fast. Why? Because if you get the introduction right, everything moves fast. Or you can just cover everything and you have nothing in the end because the foundation wasn't there. So when we look at like community organizing, bringing the people together, the relational meeting, these things are foundations. If they're not there, forget everything else. The same thing when it comes to, you know, I was reading today the statement of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, "Tafaqahu qabla an tusawwadu." He said you have to get deep understanding and knowledge before you're put in a position of leadership. The same thing in our community. Everyone wants to serve the community. Okay, what kind of community is it? It's a Muslim community. Okay, if you want to serve a Muslim community, what do you think you should have a good foundation in? Islam. You know, you should probably have some sort of foundation in Islam. You have people get really excited, they really want to help something, and they start doing a bunch of stuff, and they have no idea what they're doing. Like really, they have no idea what they're doing sometimes. And you know, Allah reward them, inshallah, what they do is still khair, inshallah, they still get reward for it, so on and so forth. But sometimes it's not that way. Sometimes it's like they actually really mess things up. Because now it's like a train that's moving in this direction, and they didn't take any time to figure out which direction the train should move in. They're just going to take the train. So community organizing, I feel like it gives certain foundations that enable people to do other things. Why can't we have any influence on this? We can't, like, it's like in MSA, we used to have Islam Awareness Week in the first quarter. When I was in MSA, we used to have Islam Awareness Week in the first quarter. People always like, no one comes to Islam Awareness Week. If you do Islam Awareness Week, it's all Muslims. I'm like, yeah, it's fine with me because the new people in MSA are learning how to organize in Islam Awareness Week. For me, it wasn't even about telling people about Islam. It was about, you need a project, the new people can learn how to organize some things, and they get some experience, and then they can do something. You have to have, there has to be something there. Anyways, it wasn't even to me. I felt inspired by Zienab. Mashallah. Anyone else before we close? Anyone else since you already asked one? Okay, last question.
I'm reading a book right now. Talks a lot about design of gatherings and also purpose behind gatherings. Often I find is like community around some sort of purpose kind of, but that purpose is often so many different things. And often people don't feel like they're moving anywhere else. So what advice would you give to recalibrate on a purpose or helping people who don't know necessarily what the purpose is?
What's that purpose for?
Like trying to solve an issue. They're not really for MSA.
Okay.
A lot of issues come to MSA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think purpose is, I think it's natural that people are going to come to the space with different purposes. And that's actually kind of the beauty of organizing and learning what people's self-interest, so like if I know Shaykh Jamaal's self-interest, right? I know that if I know that Shaykh Jamaal is interested in increasing the internal cohesion of Majlis, right? And that relational meetings are a tool for doing that, and organizing is a tool for doing that. And that's what his motivation is for, say, joining the Musa network, right? And I know, for example, that the Imam at Santa Ana Masjid actually cares very deeply about, I don't know, healthcare coverage, right? He's seeing an issue with healthcare coverage for folks inside of his community. It's okay that they come to the table with different, or just there's a lot of poverty in the community, and he wants to resolve the issues related to poverty in that community, right? It's okay for people to come together around their own self-interest. It just, when we get at the table together, we need to figure out the thing that will move us forward and that will meet the needs of a multifaceted group, right? And the beauty of issue organizing is that every issue campaign that you take on makes you stronger for the next. So you might really care about homelessness, and Khwaja really cares about mass incarceration, right? Maybe we work on Khwaja's issues this time, but that issue campaign helps us get stronger together, become more disciplined, become more organized, and so that the next campaign that we tackle, which might be homelessness, right? We're even more effective, even more disciplined, even more organized, and we've learned to fight together a little bit better. And so the primary purpose behind organizing, right, is trying to build organized people who are able to act around, their issues. And those issues can change, but the process itself, regardless of what issue we're working on, helps us get stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's somewhat how, that's like a sneak preview of how we kind of negotiate different interests inside of a community when we're doing organizing.
Very good. Alhamdulillah. Okay, I think it's good. Alhamdulillah. We covered so much. Very grateful for you coming. I feel like, how do I say this? Like there's layers. Even when we look at Hadith Jibril, there's Iman, there's Islam, and there's Ihsan. They help to develop the individual. But in the end, the individual, if they're going to do something, they have to be in a community. We're extremely limited in what we can do by ourselves. And there's a lot that we can do when we're together. So when we talk about Iman, Islam, Ihsan, we're talking about refining and improving the individual, giving them their capacity to act, in a sense, in a way that is pleasing to Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Interestingly, even in Hadith Jibril, after the 3 questions comes the question on time. And so, there is a question of, if you're going to develop yourself, what are you going to do about it? And being able to do that with one another and to be able to choose issues and grow. And as long as the people are staying together and they're working together, then they'll become stronger and stronger. So we're very grateful to you, Zienab, for coming out, and all of you for staying. I know it's been kind of a long session, but I think it's important. I think it's important for us to hear from one another, to learn from one another, and to benefit from each other's experiences. So, Shaykh, do you have anything you'd like to say before we close?
Just want to say thank you. I had a question.
Save it for afterwards.
After party. And then when the Zoom is off, and then we'll sit closer and we'll do that.
Yeah. All right. So we'll close, inshallah, and people can get whatever drinks and things are still here. Just as a side note, one of the things that's important, and we always pushed in the Majlis, was that it was easier when we had our space. There was a very set system around hospitality, and people knew if they come, they're going to help, and so on and so forth. If you are able to come early, like anyone who wants to help, it's always needed. Setup and cleanup is always needed. There's always a need for people who will sit at the table and serve people drinks and take care of them, and so on and so forth. Usually it ends up like 2 or 3 people are setting up this whole thing, which alhamdulillah is great. They get a lot of reward for that. But at the same time, you do it every week, it becomes a test for you. So if people can come early, you're welcome to come early. And usually they're here by like 4. When we start at 5, they're usually here by 4 and setting up and things. You're always welcome. And then afterwards for cleanup, usually anyone who's here helps anyway, so it's okay. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our sisters and our brother Ramzi and Yahya and their families and their friends and their loved ones and everyone who knows them, everyone who comes in contact with them, everyone who's taught them, everyone who supported them and mentored them, everyone who has aided them in every way. We ask you, Allah, to give them blessing in everything that they do and give them taysir and tawfiq in everything that they do. Allah, we ask you to make us people of remembrance, people of reflection, people of action. We ask you, Allah, to make us people who have hearts that are strong and that are wide and can handle issues and deal with things and deal with people. We ask you, Allah, to make us people of substance and purpose. We ask you, Allah, to help us to fix and understand the essence such that the form can follow the essence. We ask you, Allah, to help us in everything that we do to protect our family and our children and our loved ones, to give us knowledge that we can act upon and that benefits us and the ability to act upon it. We ask you, Allah, to bless our community and our communities and the people that make them up. We ask you, Allah, that whatever we do, with all the mistakes that we make, that we do not sever our bond with you, and that you always turn towards us, Ya Rab, and you guide us and you take us, and you help us in whatever it is that we are going through. We ask you, Allah, to overlook our sins and our shortcomings and our mistakes, and to aid us in everything that we seek, and to give us good intentions for your sake and action that is pleasing to you and pleasing to your Prophet. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. Inshallah, after a few minutes, we'll pray at Isha. We'll give some time for people to make wudu and stuff if they need to, and then we'll pray, inshallah.
Going to the same place. Stop this live stream.